Whoops, there we go. Let's go back a little bit. There we go. Hello, my name is William Sims, and today we're going to be talking about ergot alkaloids. I am a graduate student at the University of Georgia. Splitting up to what we're going to be doing today, the flow of the presentation. We're going to talk about the history. What are ergot alkaloids? Splitting up between ergot alkaloids, talking about the different words and what it is together. Why is it important? 2 research papers and a conclusion. So, looking behind the history, and it's one of the oldest mycotoxins, dating back to 600 BC, where they described it as a noxious pustule in the ear of grain. Also, it's called the ignis sacer, or the holy fire. Also, if you've heard of it, it might be called I think it's called Saint Anthony's fire. Yeah, so I was either thinking Saint Augustine. It's Saint Anthony's fire, due to the burning sensation in the limbs. This burning sensation in the limbs usually was due by gangrene, when it was ergotism for people back then. They would feel this burning sensation due to vasoconstriction. This usually led to dismemberment of those limbs, or the amputation of those limbs. And this is why they called hospitals back around 1090 AD hospitox des dismembres, which means the hospital of dismemberment. Also, ergot alkaloids were also used for obstetrics. I don't know how to pronounce that word too well. Around 1582 to 1822, because it was known to increase birthing rate. It was not increase birthing. It was the push the speed, or increase the speed of birthing. But it was known to cause uterine ruptures, resulting in stillbirths and death. So ergot alkaloids, let's split it up into 2 words and talk about it really quick. Ergot is the fungus that grows on the seed heads of cereal grains and grasses. Mostly it was known to be in rye, but can also see in wheat, barley, and oats. Alkaloid is a class of nitrogenous organic compounds, usually to cause physiological actions on humans, usually having a plant origin. This can be seen in caffeine, morphine, so this is kind of giving an example that's always negative. It's just mostly nitrogenous organic compounds. And in this case, ergot alkaloids together is a mycotoxin, usually produced by the genus of claviceps, which is an endophyte, which is the fungi that infects the actual seed head of the grain, rye, and so on. So I actually failed to mention, ergot means spur in French. It was kind of a fun little fact. If you look at the spur of roosters, kind of looks like when grain is infected with claviceps, kind of giving kind of that arching kind of look to it. If you ever want to see what it looks like, if someone ever shows you what's wrong with this grain, you can say infected with claviceps, kind of showing kind of a spur-like shape. So why do we care? Tall fescue is super popular in the Southeast United States. Currently, we have about 20 million hectares just in Southeastern states alone. But the problem with fescue toxicosis, which is the disease that cattle experience when they are exposed to ergot alkaloids in the seed heads, is changes in blood flow. This affects thermoregulation. That can affect their hair coat. They can lose weight, and also they might be standing in water or in shade for extended periods of time. And here in the Southeast United States, that might not be kind of rare. It's very hot here, but so sometimes it might be written off or they don't know. But it's something that pushes that forward. And here in the Southeast United States, again, it's very hot, so it'd be nice to kind of lower the amount of heat stress in these cattle. Decreased prolactin levels can also lead to reducing of birth weight and also milking production. So move this out of the way for you guys. I'm kind of blocking. Why not just take the endophyte infected portion of the fescue out? This is kind of a weird question. I mean, you might get this question from undergrads or just normal people around you. If you ever talk about endophyte, if you talk about fescue toxicosis and ergot alkaloids, people will be just why not just breed out a bunch of fescue that doesn't have the ergot alkaloids? And a lot of times we don't notice that ergot enhances the drought tolerance and improves the vigor. So removal may decrease the persistence, which again we'll talk later in some of the charts I have for you. So reducers don't have to choose between whether or not, they want to have the left, which is a Kentucky 31 that's not infected, endophyte infected, or the one to the right that is endophyte infected. But in this case, it's the claviceps that produce the ergot alkaloids. So you can kind of see a huge difference between both of these and kind of the persistence that both of them show. So getting into the research. The first research paper I looked at was Dr. Parish at the University of Georgia. So yeah, it worked out. And the use of non-ergot alkaloid-producing endophytes, which in this case is going to be known as the AR502, AR542, for alleviating tall fescue toxicosis in stocker cattle. He wants to evaluate the growth, performance, toxicosis, and their grazing behavior using the AR502, AR502. Let me move this again. I keep getting in the way. I'm sorry. And endophyte infected, endophyte not infected. In this case, the endophyte infected is going to be producing those ergot alkaloids I've been alluding to previously. So the endophyte infected are going to be the Jessup, Georgia 5, Kentucky 31, and the non-endophyte infected is going to be the Jessup, Kentucky 31, and the hybrid, which is the non-ergot alkaloid producing endophyte. So they still are infected with endophyte, but they're not producing those ergot alkaloids. Is going to be our AR542 and AR502. They created this by infecting the negative endophyte tall fescue cultivars with non-ergot alkaloid producing endophyte strains. So, and again, this is important because it's still keeping that usually we say that persistence is lower in non-endophyte infected, but in giving those endophytes back, that fungi will most likely enhance persistence while at the same time not producing those negative effects of the ergot alkaloids. That's what they're going for. So prolactin levels, for the results, prolactin levels as expected did decrease in our endophyte infected, but the non-endophyte infected and the AR542, actually had higher amounts of prolactin level. Rectal temperatures were increased for endophyte infected, and they also found the endophyte infected cattle for the Kentucky endophyte were seeking shade and water, most likely due to that change in thermal regulation. Calf average daily gain was higher for those that were fed the AR542, AR502, and the non-endophyte infected when compared to the endophyte infected. This is the chart. Again, let me cut out the way here. It's hard to find a good spot. I'm going to move myself for this, actually, for this part. So as you can see here, this is a big chart. There's a lot of numbers to it, but mostly what you want to look at is for a majority of the time, they did see differences in rectal temperature. They did see differences in their prolactin levels. You can see here in the post-treatment, there is a level of, or actually, let's look at their initially, their prolactin levels were pretty high. Or very low, sorry. They were 85, and then their post-treatment, they were 6. So if you look down here, the top portion of the Calhoun, this was done in 2 different areas of Georgia, Calhoun and Edenton, that's why you see these 2 different ones, is that you just see huge differences in prolactin levels, see huge differences in rectal temperatures, not huge differences, but enough to be significant. So that's just kind of give you an idea. If you want to look over this chart some more, I just want to give you what was shown in the research paper. I think I can show my face again after putting this out. Let's move myself over here. So once again, Calhoun, Edenton, see huge difference in average daily gain, almost cut in half. That is very different, very significantly different if you want to look over every part, but mainly I want to look at average daily gain, and you can see here it's 0.41 versus 0.82 and 0.82, 0.84, and then we get to Edenton, just as significant, and so, yeah, it's very interesting. Looking at the second research paper, this was done by Dr. Stratton at the University of Kentucky, and we're going to be looking now at the performance of lactating dairy cows fed tall fescue forage. We're going to be looking at endophyte-free kinhe, an 8% endophyte infected, 63% endophyte infected, endophyte-free, and also controls, being the charred grass or alfalfa. So you might be wondering why I circled 2 things here, and this is a pretty big chart. It's good to go over everything of this chart, but for the time being, I wanted to point out one thing. A lot of producers try to minimize the amount of endophyte infected, or the ergot alkaloids. They don't try to get rid of endophyte infected altogether, go cold turkey with it. A lot of the times it's very expensive, and again, it affects the persistence. So I think a lot of producers choose the latter in this case. They choose kind of keeping low amounts of endophyte infected while at the same time keeping a certain amount in there, because there's not a huge difference between a small endophyte infected versus our non-endophyte infected. As you can see here in this chart, let's take, for example, the persistence. The persistence we can see here, let's take 1984 data, 66.9 persistence versus our persistence was about 45.7 for infected. That's a pretty big difference, but there's not much a significant difference between our other 2, our CK and F. They're all not significant, but if you look at 66.9 versus 45.7, that's a pretty big difference in significance numerically, maybe not significantly. We start looking at milk fat. We actually see an increase in milk fat in endophyte infected, 63% endophyte infected, which is interesting. And I didn't look too much into that, but it might be something I might want to look into later. Maybe for the paper I'm going to be writing for this. That'd be kind of cool. If we look at milk yield, again, I wanted to look over milk yield. A large amount of milk yield difference, 18.9. We'll look at the cumulative now. This might make things a lot easier. 18.9 versus 15.6. That's a pretty big difference, especially when we're looking at either milk fat or milk yield or milk fat. Those are the two dollar signs for dairy producers. And here we're looking more into probably milk fat because this is mostly in forage. But I'm kind of going off track here, but we do see a big difference in milk yield. Rectal temperature, again, we do see a significant difference where they're much higher in the 63% infected, and we didn't see a huge difference between the 63% infected versus 8% infected endophyte, but it's good to see that there is a difference. It's changing. So a lot of producers might think that this change is worth it, though not significantly, but numerically it's different, so they might think it's worth it. But again, you can look over this whole chart. It's very interesting. We can look over the prolactin levels again, the milk yield. It's just something good to look over and kind of use back of a reference. But for time, I will not go too detailed into that. So looking into the conclusion, again, tall fescue is very popular in the Southeast United States. Producers or researchers are constantly looking into ways they continue to feed tall fescue because it is very popular, very sturdy, and it's very good in the Southeastern United States due to the fact that we do have kind of hot weathers and it can be kind of sporadic. They can survive a lot of that weather because it could be cold one day, it can be hot one day. We're used to that, right? So are these tall fescues. There's a ton of research being done and a ton that needs to be done. There's thousands of papers out there, and this is something that I think government would just love to throw money at. It's something that it's negative effects happening all the time for the whole year, and so it'd be nice to look into further. It's something I might want to do later in my research, but maybe not. No, but yeah, that is my presentation, and thank you for listening. Go pause it now.